We need to inform everybody that we are recording.
Microphone's on, please.
Microphone's on, everybody. Okay, I call this meeting to order. 6:01. Director Brony, would you like to lead us in pledge of allegiance?
Raise my hands with everybody else and heart. I
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
A little roll call. Director Rooney. Director Collins. I haven't heard from him. Director Calafox.
Here.
President Gregory. Here. Director Laura. I haven't heard from her either. I need an approval of the GSA meeting agenda. All motion to approve.
I'll second.
All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed? Hearing none, passes 3-0 with 2 absent. Moving on to public comment. Yes? Yes. All right. Public comment for any items not on the agenda. Persons wishing to speak on a matter not on the agenda may be heard this time. However, no action will be taken until placed on a future agenda. Speakers are limited to 3 minutes. Please complete a request to speak form and at the podium. Are there any other comments? No? None? Okay. Moving on. Staff and committee reports. Receive and file.
I can provide a report for a meeting for last night.
Okay.
The PBCC had a meeting last night regarding the same item you're programming tonight for the amendments to the GSA, or the GSD rather. After some comments from the public, the board ultimately approved the amendments to go as a recommendation to the GSAs for approval of the GSA level. They also discussed Executive Order N722, which prohibits the new wells from being drilled within the basin except for domestic wells that will produce less than 2 acre-feet of water a year. This is to limit the installation of additional production wells that would impact existing wells. Wells that are direct replacements for existing wells will be allowed. This order also requires that the well applicant get approval from the GSA for the wells to be drilled in order to get a county building permits or county well permit. So essentially, if an individual was interested in drilling a new ag well or other production well, then they would have to prove to the GSA that where it's located, that it does not have any impact on any other well in that basin or in that GSA. And if, for instance, a well is to be located at the edge of a district or at the edge of our district, sharing with the county, they would have to prove that it doesn't impact any of the wells in our district or any of the wells in the county, which is extremely difficult to do. It is possible, I suppose. So I'm working with the county to make sure that the requirements for that are identified and universal between the county and us, since they surround us. We haven't had any applications yet. This is something new that's only come out, I think 3 weeks ago. So I don't anticipate any ag wells being drilled within the district, but the county had several meetings with well drillers to express what this meant to them and what it meant long term. This doesn't have any sort of sunset, so this could be held into the foreseeable future. Other than that, that's about all I discussed. you have any questions, I can answer that.
Are there any questions? No? So you mentioned that it is just the agriculture, so the domestic wells are not need to follow those requirements then?
So if you're drilling a domestic well, then that's 2 acre-feet or less a year, then it doesn't apply to that. So if you're only drilling a well for your house, then most likely it doesn't apply. If you're drilling a well to supply your house and to supply some sort of agriculture on your property, then you would have to prove that that additional use over 2 acre-feet doesn't impact any well around that well. And there's no distance relation, so it could be 50 feet away, it could be 5 miles away, which it would get extremely expensive to be able to prove that that doesn't impact anything else.
Right.
And this is a state level order, this is not a county order, so everybody gets to enjoy this equally.
Okay. All right, thank you. Are there any public comments regarding the report?
Yes.
Excuse me, Calvin said, just text me, said he'd be here at 6:30 for the closed session.
Okay, thank you.
This request for, hello? Check. Hello? Okay.
Takes a second.
Just a request for clarification, really?
One second, please. Mr. Dodge, are you running the timer?
No.
All right, put it back. Okay, thank you. Go ahead, I'm sorry.
In relation to enforcement of this, is this going to be incumbent upon the district, the state, the county, who's ultimately responsible for approving the wells, that is? Okay, that's my comment.
Are there any other public comments regarding the report? No? Mr. Dodge, would you like to answer that?
Of course. So this is a state level requirement. The state ultimately can enforce it, but it's up to the county, who is the permitting agency, to actually issue the permits. However, they're under direction from the Director of Groundwater Sustainability to follow this order as closely as possible, which requires them to get a letter from anyone interested in drilling a well, getting a letter from the GSA that they're in, saying that they are in fact not going to impose any sort of, they're not going to detract from any of the other wells that are already in existence. So an individual would have to prove to us, if it's in our district, would have to prove to us that it doesn't impact anything else around it. Then we need to provide a letter to the county saying that it in fact does not impact anything around it, and then they would issue a permit. As a permitting agency, the county is ultimately responsible for the permit.
All right, I have a question. What if, is this pertaining to new permits, or what about permits that have taken place prior to this ruling ordinance?
So if there's a permit in existence prior to this, then it doesn't apply to this. However, this applies to all new permits that would be issued after the order date.
Okay.
And just for clarification, an individual were to have to replace their well, they could replace a domestic or ag well in kind, which means it can't be any bigger than what it is currently. It can't produce any more than it does currently. But they could replace one that already exists. They just can't drill a new one that creates more demand.
All right, thank you. All right, moving on to consent calendar. Approval of board meeting minutes. The item listed above is scheduled for consideration as a group in one vote. Any director or member of the public may request an item to be withdrawn from the consent agenda to discuss or to change the recommended course of action unless an item is pulled for separate consideration by the board. The following items are recommended for approval without further discussion. Yes, please.
I'll motion to approve draft meeting, May 24th, 2022.
I'll second.
I got a motion from Director Palafox and second by Director Rooney. All in favor? Aye. Anyone opposed? Hearing none, passes 3-0 with 2 absences.
Okay, moving on to board action items. Review, discuss, and receive and file the amended final draft sections of the Groundwater Sustainability Plan GSP for Basin 3-004.06 Salinas Valley Paso Robles area.
So again, this is the original GSP was passed in 2019. This is an amendment to that based on the corrections or the comments that were provided by DWR for our GSP. Apologies, computer's being slow. So there's changes to 5 sections. Section 4.7.2, 5.5, 7.6, 8.4, and 8.8. They all revolve around 2 concepts. One is the integration of surface water into the groundwater, or the interconnection of surface water into groundwater, and the chronic lowering of water tables in the de minimis wells, which is 2 acre-feet or less. Sorry, I'm trying to open the correction here. Unfortunately, on the reports that were in the packet, it did not have the red line in it. So I'll go through those quickly. There's not a lot of changes. In section 4.7.2, there is just some clarifying language. I don't know, were you guys able to go through all this?
I did not.
Okay, so in 4.7.2, groundwater discharge areas inside the subbasin, essentially the correction is the entire section. It's adding additional information regarding a model showing the location of groundwater wells, stream beds, and simulated discharge from groundwater runoff into the stream beds, which creates the surface water. This primarily has to do with the Estrella River and the Salinas River through the Whitley Gardens area, past Ruggles and San Miguel. I think so the purple is where they're assuming that the runoff water is actually discharging into the river and could be percolating into the groundwater. The blue is just the identified stream bed. These little triangles right here are based on geographical mapping. That's just where they identified some sort of a spring or a seepage that doesn't actually connect to a river, stream, or a creek bed. Is there any questions on that one? No. And section 5.5. Technical difficulties. Doesn't want that one on. 5.5 is interconnected surface water. I don't have the red line, unfortunately, for this part. And most of the clarifying language was between identifying what areas could be connected with surface water, between surface water and groundwater, and which areas really don't, and clarifying some of the language to indicate where initially it was projected that there was some sort of interconnection, and clarifying whether that actually could exist or didn't exist. Most of this is theoretical. It's all based off of the topographic maps, the satellite imagery. So nobody actually went out and looked at each one of these sites. It's just based on what the latest satellite data was for the most part. Section 7.6. In this section, lots of graphs, lots of pictures. This one, for instance, is just showing where the red is areas where there's less vegetation, and the green is more, and yellow is less. Basically just trying to explain how things have progressed during the drought. And again, it's based on satellite imagery, so it may or may not be as accurate as we'd like. On 7.6, Interconnected Surface Water Monitoring Network, essentially this whole section is the same with the addition of a paragraph. And the paragraph reads, the potential connection along the Salinas River is between this surface water system and an adjacent alluvial aquifer. There is no evidence that the Salinas River surface water flows are connected to the underlying passables formation aquifers. The potential connection between the surface water system along the middle reach of the Estrella River from Shed Canyon to Martingale Circle and along the San Juan Creek upstream of Spring Creek and the underlying passables formation aquifers is unknown, but sufficient evidence exists that there could potentially be a connection, and therefore further investigation in these areas is recommended. And then there was just some spelling errors. But basically what the state was asking for was not definitive proof that there was a connection, but that we didn't adequately connect the two. So basically by adding a paragraph like that, they were satisfied that we would look into it further and expand our monitoring network to determine whether there was a connection and to what extent that connection existed. Then 8.4. I'm sorry, this is really dry stuff, but
I enjoy it.
while I'm waiting for my computer, this chart right here, or diagram right here, basically just identifies different sites. These little green squares, if you could see those are sites for integrated surface water or interconnected surface water measurement sites. So those are where we could put monitoring wells in the future. The blue dots right here, up here, those are existing wells that already exist that aren't confidential. There's a lot of information from private landowners that is incorporated in this as confidential, so that the actual location doesn't show up, but the data is incorporated into the modeling. These little like bullseye looking ones, those are where they would also like to install additional monitoring wells so that they could, again, determine whether there's any interconnection or not. In this section, there's very minor change. Essentially, the extent of the change is in this first paragraph right here, or first bullet item. Actually, this bullet item, and just adding the second line right here. Basically, the paragraph currently reads the identified deficiencies and corrective actions under the DWR defined by DWR in its June 3rd, 2021 letter reviewing the Pastorals Area Basin 2020 Groundwater Sustainability Plan and the January 21st, 2022 incomplete determination of the 2020 Pastorals Area Subbasin Groundwater Sustainability Plan. Plan. And just clarifying that it applied to the original letter and to the subsequent incomplete letter, which just the incomplete letter was derived from not having the corrections made by January 21st, 2022, which was basically a milestone from DWR saying, great, if you can have all these corrections done by then you're good to go. If not, then we issue this incomplete letter and it gives you 6 more months, which we received an incomplete letter and gave us 6 more months, which puts us into July, which works out with our timeline to be able to actually have a public hearing and adopt the final GSC. Finally, section 8.8. In section 8.8, the minimum thresholds. this section, paragraph 8.2, the minimum thresholds, this entire section was added. The section reads, the minimum threshold for interconnected surface water is a decline in the alluvial water table elevation as measured at alluvial aquifer RMS wells in the spring measurement along the Salinas River, or measurement round along the Salinas River. Middle reach of the Straw River or San Juan Creek upstream or Spring Creek that is 1, likely caused by groundwater pumping in the Pastoral Formation aquifer. 2 is more than 10 feet below the spring 2017 elevation. 3 persists for more than 2 consecutive years. And 4 occurs along more than 15% of the length of any of the 3 spring reaches. It is noted that the potential connection along the Salinas River is between the surface water system and the adjacent alluvial deposits. There is no evidence that the Salinas River surface water flows are connected to the underlying Pastoral Formation aquifer. The potential connection between the surface water system along the middle reach of the Estrella River or along the San Juan Creek upstream of Spring Creek and the underlying Pastoral Formation aquifer is unknown, but sufficient evidence exists that there could potentially be a connection, and therefore further investigation in these areas is recommended. Sticking regulation specifies the minimum threshold for the interconnected surface water shall be defined as the rate or volume of surface water depletions caused by groundwater use that has adverse effects or impacts on beneficial uses of surface water and may lead to undesirable results. However, the regulation also allows use of groundwater elevation as a reasonable proxy for the rate of flow depletion. Depletion in such approach is supported by adequate evidence in the pastoral subbasin. Depth of water is a reasonable proxy because the resource most likely to be impacted is the eutrophic riparian vegetation, which is sensitive to depth to water but not to the rate of percolation. Also, analysis of potential impacted beneficial use that do not depend on the rate of stream flow downstream water users and steelhead trout migration indicates that the likely magnitude of impact is negligible or negligibly small. Finally, my time is up. Finally, a practical standpoint, induced percolation from streams is difficult to measure, particularly if a small percentage of total flow varies substantially from each reach along the stream. Lastly, there presently are few alluvial aquifer monitoring wells along the middle reach of the Straw River and upper reach of San Juan Creek to evaluate the minimum threshold for new monitoring wells will be installed along Straw River and San Juan Creek during that period, allowing the minimum threshold to be applied to those reaches in subsequent implementation periods. After that long-winded thing, basically what that means is that we are more clearly defining what is going to cause us to determine a minimum threshold, meaning that the water table has fallen below the defined level and for a long period of time. Essentially what happened in the first round is that it was too narrow and we were going to always be in violation. And it wasn't a reasonable assimilation of what was really happening in that area of the basin. This clarifies it to the satisfaction of the DWR who is approving it, and it also implements a requirement for us to install additional monitoring sites to better understand what is going on in those areas, to better understand the basin overall. Again, the changes are pretty minor. This is the most significant, as far as number of words, but they're all important. If you guys have time, please read it. Please ask questions if you have any questions. Today we're only asking for you to receive and file it. This is opening the notice period for a public hearing, or for comments. A public hearing will be held in June, 60 days from now. in order to adopt the amended GSP. Is there any questions?
Procedure question, did we extend the time limit for this? We still have to receive and file this. I don't know, Madam Clerk, we need to make a motion to extend the time for this for 5 minutes because we're over.
Yeah, let's.
Okay.
Motion.
I'll make the motion to extend the GSA meeting an additional 5 minutes.
I'll second.
All in favor? Anyone opposed? Hearing none? That's 5-0, no absence.
All right, are there any questions?
Have a quick comment. Mr. Dox, thank you for reading off this report. I don't know really how much more information the state, I mean, we spent how many decades doing studies on this basin? I don't know how much more they really want, how technical they really want to get into on this. But, we should be moving towards the phase of let's fix the basin. The state asked us for air splitting information.
So we are moving in that direction already.
Right.
It's kind of a multi-pronged path that we're on. They released money for implementation of some of the projects that were identified in the GSP. One of those being the recycled water line from our treatment plant to the vineyards for use of the recycled water instead of potable well water. Among other projects in the county. But basically, this is just trying to clean up the report so that we have an accurate, compliant report to move forward. We have annual audits that have to be done, which I'm sure the board is aware. They have to be done for this report saying that we're actually complying or moving forward and we're not moving in a negative direction. Thank you, Mr. Dox.
All right, are there any other questions or comments from our directors? Okay. Are there any public comments?
Yes.
Patrick Saints for 886 River Road, San Miguel resident. I'd like to remind the board that it's incumbent upon them to come to these meetings prepared, having read all of the material. These things related to the GSP affect